Okay, it's time to start getting our feet wet in the Final Cut Pro 10 editing environment. In order to show you around, I'm going to first show you what everything looks like when you open the software without anything loaded, and then we'll spend most of the time looking at the software populated with our assets. All right, let's first take a look at our empty interface. Your interface will only be empty if you haven't yet loaded the exercise files. So if you've already loaded them, just sit back and watch for now. We'll only be in here a moment. All right, so we have three basic windows. We have the browser, which contains our libraries pane and this area here for previewing clips. We have the viewer, and we have the timeline space. Now, the libraries pane is where you store your libraries, and because all of your events, which contain your projects and clips, live inside of your libraries, this is basically the space where you'll organize everything. Down here is the timeline, which displays whatever project I have loaded. And most importantly, the timeline is the space where we construct our edit. And over here in the default view, the viewer functions to show the visual output of my material. Now, we can't see this in action yet because everything is empty. So let's look at this same space, but this time loaded with our assets. I'm just going to come up to File, Open Library, and then I'm going to choose Other. And here are the libraries that it's identified. If you need to browse for it, you can go to Locate and then use your browser to navigate to the appropriate library. But I'm going to just choose Final Cut Pro 10 Essential Training, and it should come online very quickly, as you can see here. And if I wanted to open another library, I would do the same thing, Open Library, and I'm going to open up my Quick Start library. Okay, so I have these two libraries, and I can go back and forth and work in each of them as I need to. If I want to close a library, I just select it, right-click, and close the library. And now I'm just focused on my Final Cut Pro 10 Essential Training library. All right, so as you can see, inside of this library, I have two events. I have chocolate, and I have exercise files. These events are essentially repositories where I'm going to store and organize all of my media, my video, my audio, my still images, and graphics, and so on. Inside of my chocolate event, if I twirl this down, I have keyword collections, which are tools that allow me to organize various parts of my assets, and we'll take a look at that in a future movie. And inside of exercise files, I have various folders. And inside of those folders, I have keyword collections which label various projects that I'm going to have you work on throughout the course. All right, so I'm going to twirl that up, and let's go back into my chocolate event, which is where I have most of my clips. Now, to the right of the libraries pane, I have this area where I view my clips. And right here at the top, these clips are just still images, so they don't contain any moving video. But as I go down here, you can see that as I hover my mouse over these clips, you can see the visual output here in the viewer. I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just hovering my mouse, and you can see the skimmer go across the clips, and it allows me to very quickly see what's going on in each of these shots. By the way, if you're hearing any audio as you drag, then you also have audio skimming on, which is an option up here in the view menu. I usually have that off, so if you want to turn that off yourself, the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift-S. All right, so if I drag this slider down here to the left, you can see that it says all, which means that every single one of the clips in this space is represented by a single thumbnail, whether it's 2 seconds, 2 minutes, or 2 hours. However, as I start to drag this to the right, you can see that there's a better indication of the duration of each of these clips. For example, this says 5 seconds now, so each one of these thumbnails represents 5 seconds of length. I can go all the way to 1/2 a second so that each one of these thumbnails is 1/2 a second long. Not too many times would you display your clip data like that, but for example, you might want to put it on 10 seconds or so that you have a little bit of an indication of how long each one of these clips is when you're looking through your material. Also down here, I can choose my clip height, so if I want to see more clips and maximize my real estate, I can drag all the way to the left. Or if I really want to zoom in and see these as just little tiny movies, I can drag it to the right. I kind of like a happy medium. I can also show my audio waveforms. And so any clips that contain both audio and video, For example, some of these, you can see that I have my waveform right here. If I'm more concerned about real estate, I can uncheck that and I get a little bit more space. I can also look at each of these clips in a list as opposed to my film strip view. I do that by coming down to this button here, Show Clips in List View. And when I click on that, you can see that whatever clip is chosen, I see a visual representation up here at the top. But mostly, you can see that I have all of these columns of data, and this can be very important when I'm looking up specific statistics about my clips. I can always show more data by right-clicking up here in this space and putting a check mark next to any of the columns that I want to show. Let me go back to my film strip view, and I want to talk now about projects. Okay, so I'm going to come down to exercise files where most of my projects live. Now, projects are simply sequences, which are essentially the edited program made from combinations of clips. In this library, I have all of my projects in their own event, okay? But you can have projects and clips living in the same event, so just realize that. In fact, in exercise files, I have projects, but I also have some clips here, so they're both coexisting in the same event. Now let me just pick one of these projects so I can load it into the timeline. It doesn't matter which one, but you just double click. Okay, so now I have my project loaded down here in the timeline. As I drag through the timeline, you'll notice that I see the visual output up here in the viewer. And right now I'm using my skimmer. Notice here at the beginning of the sequence I have my playhead. So I sort of have a dual purpose playhead / skimmer here. I'll remember that because we're going to come back to that. If I click and drag, you'll notice that I am moving my playhead and skimmer at the same time. Now to go back skimming my clip contents, I just come back up here, and now as I drag through these clips, you'll notice that the viewer shows me my clip content. So wherever my skimmer is, that's what I'm seeing in the viewer. Here's my timeline, here are my clips. If I would like to set up two viewers, one for my clips and one for my timeline, I can do that. I'm just going to come up to Window, and then I'm going to choose Show Event Viewer, okay? And now this is for my clip content, my event viewer, and notice that this viewer over here is reserved just for my timeline, okay? So you can work that way if you like. This is how a lot of other editing programs are set up, but for right now, I'm going to disable that. Now let's briefly go back down to the timeline for our loaded project here. Our project, which again is a graphical representation of the collection of edited clips that came from decisions that I made up here. I can change the size of the clips in my timeline by clicking on this film icon here. And if I go all the way down, you can see that they can become quite small or quite large. If I go to the right, I can also change the way I see my video in relation to my audio by selecting these various options. For example, if I go all the way to the right, everything is just represented by a single bar. Here, I'm looking at 100% video. There's no audio waveforms. Whereas here on the left, I'm looking at 100% audio waveforms and no visual information. So I usually like this third one or this fourth one to kind of split the difference. All right, and then up here in this general area is a very important toolbar, and we'll be exploring all of these tools in future movies. Okay, now obviously this was a very quick introduction to some of the major elements of the Final Cut Pro X interface, but with that foundation, we're ready to continue learning all about the various windows, tools, and buttons in future movies.